So, welcome to the Sunday afternoon call. In the UK, it's late Sunday morning, just in time for worship service at Pentecostal Anglican Church, or the Episcopalian or whatever. So, we got started a little late because we were having so much fun singing to each other and whatnot. But we turned the video recorder on so that Robert can introduce his question. Go ahead, Robert. The floor is yours.
So thank you for the floor. Always good to have a floor.
It's actually a plank.
A plank. Okay, I'll jump off. So I'm curious about the phenomenon known as Stockholm syndrome. And I think probably most people are familiar with it. But I know it originates in a case where in Stockholm, Sweden, where a Swedish robber took some hostages, and long story short, the hostages fell in love with the robber.
I think it was one woman, wasn't it? There was actually just one woman, and she wound up helping them with their efforts.
Yep. And this is a very common phenomenon. It's also known as trauma bonding. That's like the millennial way we talk about it, of people in abusive, captive types of situations, could be an abusive relationship or marriage or something like that, will develop love or positive feelings towards the abuser, even taking on their own perspectives at times. And it's considered a survival strategy. So even police officers will sometimes recommend it to hostages in order to survive, because people that do it tend to have a better chance of survival. But it can create these long-term issues, such as staying in a situation for too long they shouldn't be in, is one, or another is they don't hold the abuser accountable for their crimes at all, or the criminal, in the case of the bank robber. And I just think it's a really interesting psychological phenomenon, and I'd love to hear your take, and I think we all would like to hear your take.
All right.
I think we've all kind of been there in some way. Even being in society can be like Stockholm syndrome sometimes, just towards society.
Yeah. I think that the word Stockholm syndrome got coined in the 70s or 80s. Okay. It's got older words. The phenomenon that they listed there was because it was that particular situation was so striking, but it is more common than you would imagine. That in fact, you said that the cops would often recommend that people go along to get along. I've got another group of people who are also well known, even more well known, and there's so many more of them. They're called mommies. And for good measure, we'll add daddies. We'll also go so far as to say every child is raised in the Stockholm syndrome. We all have stress coming from our parents, and we tend to not to blame them for the mess they made called me. That we let them get away with it. And in fact, we bond with all of society. We go along to get along. A really interesting example of that is the bully oftentimes has two guys that follow him around to help him bully. You know why they do that? Because if they didn't, he would bully them. So you join with the big dude. Okay, another example of the Stockholm syndrome is Republican Party following Donald Trump. I remember how that got started because anybody who disagreed with him in the early days got destroyed on Twitter. And so they decided to stop doing that and start getting along, and now he owns them. So here's a question that we can start looking at, and that is that which is better, to adapt or to rebel? Which is it better, because a lot of kids have trouble in society. They call it an authority figure issue. Have you ever heard of that? Isn't that exactly the opposite of the Stockholm syndrome? And guess what? People will do first one and then the other. That everybody is capable of doing both, rebelling and have authority figures, and also adapting to the authority. Go ahead, Thomas.
Yeah, but I also think that could be not the only two options, because it's also possible to not openly rebel, to adapt to the situation, but without mentally
I can think of
assuming the
at least
authority that
two
is supposed
options.
to be there.
I can think of two options. One would be sit quietly and stay out of the way of everybody. Keep your mouth shut, which is often one of the best things to do. And then there is the noble thing to do. The way that the Buddha would do it would be take a hike, get away from there, stay away from war zones. So those are four different options. One is to adapt, the other one is to rebel, and the third one is to shut up, and the fourth one is to take a hike. And taking a hike is the most superior. And yet most people take the adapt. We started adapting when we were really little kids, that in fact you could go so far as to say that the adaptor is the victim's mentality. We all start out as victims, and we adapt because we don't want to get hit, we don't want to get punished, we don't even want to be threatened. Go ahead, Carl.
I can't unmute. Yeah,
You're muted again. You were unmuted and then you're muted again. Now you're unmuted. Go for it.
No, as someone from Stockholm, the situation there was a pure hostage situation, wasn't it? Where the captures starts turning partnering with their hostage takers, right?
Mm-hmm.
What would be the Dhamma way to do it? If you're in a hostage, you can't walk away, right? So what would be the Dhamma way to do in that hostage situation?
Well, there would be the way of keeping quiet, staying away from them, staying out of the way. By the way, there's another institution you probably heard about that is absolutely 100% in that Stockholm situation, only they've got a double bind in the sense that there's two different systems of authority at conflict with each other. This is called prison. Who are you going to adapt to? You're going to adapt to the guards when the guards are there, and then you're going to adapt to the bullies when the bullies have no guards. And so that makes prison kind of dangerous. You don't know who to adapt to. But it's always that adaptation that the people choose to do. We started doing that as children. We adapted. We went along to get along. And sometimes we do it first class, that in fact, in many places, an example of that would be when the guru dies. The one who adapted to the guru is the one who takes over after the guru's dead. And now everybody keeps adapting, but they're not adapting to him. They're still adapting to the guru, and he's just, the surrogate for the guru, because he's so well adapted that he's not likely to do much changing. So these are various ways of talking about it, Robert. But the point is that we can see that there is a whole range of behavior depending upon the range of the authoritarian system. but we were all raised under an authoritarian system. And those, you've heard the expression, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. No, the squeaky wheel gets put on the rubbish bin if he keeps squeaking. That's the rebellion. So we rebel, and we are destroyed when we rebel. That was actually part of the theme of Rebel Without a Cause, that some people are just, they will rebel with anything. That in fact, not only rebel, but they'll try to compete with the authority. They want to take over. And the rebel never does take over. The one who takes over, in fact, is the one who adapted the best. So, let us now talk about it in the sense of this adaptation rebellion syndrome, that the Stockholm syndrome is one side of that, and that we adapt. That becomes our culture. The culture is the culture of adaptation to the elders who made the kids adapt, and now they grow up and they're still adapting to the dead elders, but they're also now the authority, and they have to make other people adapt to them. This is true regardless of the form of government. It's always a psychological thing that you've been talking about, Robert, that it's built into our DNA. If we don't get along, we get thrown out. Unless we can hide or take the getting thrown out happily, which is the system of the Buddha. Just leave society. Don't mess with it. Thomas, you asked that same question, and so let's talk about it for you. Will you go ahead and restate your question?
Well, yeah, I think it's similar, but it was presented as how should we deal with people who are not aware that they are responsible for their own feelings and reactions, so they can think we are hurting them, and we know we can prevent that in some way. So what kind of responsibility do we have, if any? That's the way I presented it.
Okay. When you say responsibility, you're talking about responsibility to fix what's broken in them?
No. But responsibility to not make it worse if we can avoid it easily.
All right. Well, one of the ways that we can do that is by not talking about it. That keeping our mouth shut is often the very best thing to do. Robert, in fact, is probably our best example of that, of learning to keep your mouth shut when you're in that situation. But often we can see that we go back and forth and back and forth. Robert, you actually adapted in some ways, going along to get along, and in other times you chose to just be quiet, and then occasionally you chose to just walk out, just leave.
Yep.
But the natural tendency for you, the way that you were raised, is to rebel. So you had all four of those things going in a pretty tough situation. All right?
Yep, the 4 tracks on the CD.
Uh-huh. Right. So actually, ultimately, really moving away and taking a hike was the best thing to do. In your case, it's called divorce.
Yep, I would add to that too, that certain tracks can be heard differently by the other person. So for example, if you are walking away, they can take that as a rebellion, but it's actually walking away. If you're being quiet, that can be taken as going along to get along, when it's really being quiet. but you're not in any control of how they will perceive whatever it is you're doing. And so you just have to accept that and just do what you need to do in the particular situation.
That's a very, very good point that I was about to make. Going back to Thomas, when we were talking about it from the perspective that what is your responsibility, the answer is that if we will revisit the second noble truth. Anybody willing to how about you, David? What's the second noble truth?
The cause of suffering, tanha.
Pardon?
Second noble truth, the cause of suffering.
Yes.
The cause.
What is the cause of the dukkha, the dissatisfaction? Not necessarily suffering. That Robert wasn't suffering, but he sure was dissatisfied. He didn't have any broken bones. He didn't get a 3rd-degree burn. She didn't beat the hell out of him. She just beat the tar out of him. So he wasn't suffering, but he sure was disappointed. So let's make sure that when we talk about dukkha, suffering is not what it is. I'm in the habit too. So let's go back to and change it to the real definition of the word, and that is dissatisfaction, disappointment, not getting what we want. So what is the cause of dissatisfaction? Not getting what we want. Go ahead, I'm listening.
Either trying to get what we don't have or trying to push away what we do have.
Okay.
Tanha.
And what is the root cause of those two things?
Tanha? What is the root cause of tanha?
No, the root cause of the second noble truth of greed, ill will.
Greed and ill will are both tanha.
Ignorance, maybe?
How about delusion or ignorance? Greed, ill will, and delusion. The cause of greed and ill will is that we think we'll be better off if we get what we want, or we think we'll be better off if we get rid of that which we don't want. Right? David?
I think it, yeah. Oh.
Okay. All right. So, Thomas, the reason that we're bringing that point up is that when you thoroughly understand for yourself the second noble truth, therein lies your responsibility, your ability to respond to your own ignorance when you can see it, the ability to respond to your own greed when you see it, and the ability to respond to your own not liking, ill will, wanting to get rid of something, in fact, being dissatisfied with something. That's your responsibility. What this is actually indicating then on this other level that you're talking about is that you cannot fix anybody, as Robert was just pointing out. It doesn't matter what you do, one of these 4 things, to adapt, to rebel, to remain silent, or to take a hike, because you don't know how they're going to respond to that. And in fact, the same person will respond different ways to each time that you try something. They may experiment on you. If you rebel,
they certainly will.
Yeah, if you rebel,
yeah.
They know that, and that's good for a fight. So when you stay silent and they're ready for a fight, they'll see your silence as ready to fight.
What about being able to respond in a calm manner rather than become violent or yelling? So I'm somebody disrespects me, but I remain calm, and then I speak my mind and tell them, the coming from the
That
truth.
would be
and I don't
called
get
quiet rebellion.
They would totally interpret that as rebellion. Believe me, I know how they see that. Any kind of response and with reason or logic or reality is interpreted as rebellion, which is the kind of rebellion that I did.
But it makes me feel
in my situation.
coming from strength though, and it makes me feel like I'm on the right path. Like,
Well, the right path is to take a hike, to get away from them, to stop trying to fix them, to stop trying to state your position, because you're
It's-
inviting disrespect. That David, do you remember earlier in the call before we turned the video recorder on about your volunteer work? And my response to that is don't volunteer any suggestions for change, because that will be seen as rebellion.
The other thing to add to this too, I must say, is that to investigate the reason as to why it can feel good to say the truth often has to do with like the feeling of winning, right?
Mhm.
Because you're engaging with that person in a competitive way almost. And so it might feel good because you can feel like I got that,
Yeah, I
barrage
scored a
off.
point
I
on
fired
that one.
that
Exactly.
artillery. Yep.
And
But
that
the
keeps the
real
war
winning
going.
is, yes, and the real winning is to not play, because you don't need to play the game anymore, because you realize that they're in their own delusions and there's really nothing you can do about that. And
Good
that's
one.
what you have to, yep, you just
I
have to let go of
I
that.
like the idea.
So, Thomas, you got your hand up.
Yeah, about why does it feel good to tell the truth? Another reason I think it sometimes is, at least in my experience, more from the side of the victim, from the side of I want to stop this here because if not, I fear what may happen to me in the future. So it's in my case, very often I've seen it's trying to put some kind of stopgap. So it comes more from the side of oh, I'm a victim, I need to protect myself. In my experience.
Right. However, when we respond with the truth, as you've heard Robert say, is that invites the other person to see you as rebelling. When you speak your truth, what that means is you're right and they're wrong. Those are fighting words, and never mind how softly they're spoken. The better thing to do is to keep your mouth shut.
Well,
and to add to, oh, go ahead, Lars. You're
well, they may fire you,
rebuttal
but then
here.
maybe you'll get a separation package instead of like quitting. But I like the idea of going for a hike and taking a vacation. But some people have made the argument that you get another job, and then you're going to still find yourself in a similar situation. So they argue that, well, maybe you should try to learn to deal with it, or in some way. And
Right. Okay. Here's the point that you're making then is that trying to change the job means trying to change the outside world. Changing the authority is not going to change the authority. The authority, no matter what person is sitting in the chair of the authority, they're going to generally behave the same way. So changing jobs is not going to be the answer. What we have to change is our own mind, our own personality. All right. And so the two that we're looking at is the adapt and rebel are not noble. They're ordinary. Being right and telling the authority that you're right isn't going to work. That in fact, if the authority can somehow see that you are right, like for instance, you're the one who can get the code written and it works, and nobody else can write the code to get it to work. But that's because.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead,
So,
Dhammarato.
so the point is then is that we cannot change the authority figure, nor can we rebel nor adapt. That what we can do is do the job, which would be done in silence. Or the other option would be just to take a hike. Now, when I'm saying take a hike, that can be temporary. It can be for the afternoon, it can be for the day, it can be for a week, it can be for a month, or it can be a long-term thing. But the point is that we often are in situations to where the taking of the hike doesn't work. But what we do need to do is when we take a hike is to make sure that when we come back, we're not coming back to a combat zone. If we're coming back into a combat zone, the right thing to do again is to leave. This is the advice of the Buddha. He was very specific about that. You don't stay around a war zone, which means if you're adapting, that's the Stockholm syndrome. And we don't want to adapt in the beginning. And later, if we do adapt, we're giving away things that we don't want to give away. That in fact, sometimes we get into great difficulty because we're adapting. Sometimes it wins, but the important point is don't rebel. The rebellion part is the guarantee to have the difficulty. So the noble way is to either remain quiet, or if you have an opportunity, get out of there, take a hike, walk away.
And to add to all of that, I think it's also important to acknowledge that different people are playing different games. So usually if you're in a situation with someone like that, the game that they're playing is not about the truth, it's about winning and dominating. That's the only game that matters. So, for example, if you're talking about politics, in a political example of this, a crafty demagogue authoritarian person would just change the subject completely when you're trying to tell the truth, or someone is trying to tell the truth, and completely flip the situation so they're still on top.
Mm-hmm.
If you're in an abusive relationship or work situation, that authoritarian person only really cares about winning. They don't care about the truth. So if you're trying to play the truth game, you're at the wrong place, and you should pick up your chessboard and go for a walk and
The
find a
chessboard
place
doesn't
you can
belong to
play.
you. The
Yeah,
authority
not even the
owns it.
chess. Yeah, it's like the painting brush or something, or the harmonica. Pick up your harmonica and get away from their chessboard, and just go play that harmonica somewhere else where they are playing the game that you want to play.
Robert, you made an important point, and I'll give a word for it. It's called whataboutism. The authority who is being proven wrong, his answer will be, yeah, but what about this and what about that? He'll do anything and say anything in order to remain the boss. Dylan, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I was wondering, wouldn't there be circumstances, and I'm not trying to do a whataboutism here, although it could sound like it, but different people have different levels of maturity and openness, right? And so if you are always going into, I'm going to be silent on the situation, or I'm going to be silent on this topic, you are discounting the opportunity for that person to grow as a person by not telling the truth, right? Like changes in society have happened because people have told the truth and they haven't been avoidant or buckled over or said, oh, no, you're right. So I wonder if...
Oh, no, you're right, though. That's the Stockholm syndrome again.
Sure.
That's going along to get along, as opposed to real silence, which could be nothing more than mm-hmm.
Right. But if even in a state of silence, most would interpret that as getting along or just being agreeable rather than, speaking the truth, which is giving them the opportunity to grow and evolve. So
maybe, in fact, they'll listen to what they're saying if you keep quiet. But so long as you're talking, you're competing with them. And so the better thing to do is to remain silent. Maybe they'll actually hear what they're saying.
But most of the time
My
they wouldn't,
comment,
right?
Sorry, what was that, Dylan?
But most of the time they wouldn't, because people just
Most
keep
right,
going on their
but
same
it's
programs.
it's an opportunity though for them to hear it. But going to the bathroom,
yeah.
saying, "Excuse me, I've got to go to the toilet." Excuse me, one of us is full of shit, and I'm going to the toilet.
I have a comment on that, Dhammarato, which is
Yes.
I think it really depends on the context quite a bit, Dylan. So, you know, there are certain people and situations where they are definitely open to hearing that, and certain situations and people that are not open to hearing that. And you can usually tell, you know, if you really pay attention as to whether or not they're willing to hear the truth or they just want to dominate all the time. And I don't think there's a golden rule. I think there are specific situations where they might be willing to hear that. But there are many, many, many situations where people like that, they just want to dominate. They don't want to hear it, and you'll create more conflict and maybe issues by trying to tell them the truth. And I don't think it's something where you could say it's a disrespect to them not to tell them the truth if they're continually disrespecting you and other people around them. If that's their behavior and you've witnessed it or there's lots of evidence for that, then you're probably much better off just finding a different game to play. But if there's someone that you have a history of seeing that maybe they're kind of domineering, but occasionally they'll listen to a dissenting voice, that's a different type of situation than I think what we're talking about. But that exists. You know, like sometimes people have that with parents, where they can have an authoritarian parent that will occasionally listen to dissent if it's a good case that is to be made. That happens sometimes. But there are also others out there that they don't want any dissent, and you've seen it. That's the pattern. And if you try to speak the truth, it goes into the competitive mode. It makes it harder for you to escape, because now the conflagration is going. You're further enmeshing with them, and they just keep trying to beat you down even harder. So it just depends. You have to pay attention to see if it's safe or not to do that.
Mm-hmm. Always, ultimately, taking a hike is the safest thing, unless they chase you, and that happens sometimes. But generally, it's not. Okay, Ross, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to say, isn't this kind of just all about you'd say take a hike, you go into seclusion, you can have chance to build up your skills, you become more skillful in situations, and you're ready to kind of deal with it in a better way. But just like you talk about practice normally, is that kind of how you mean it?
Yes, exactly. Or
and also, you don't have to deal with it at all. You could
yeah,
just
you don't have to deal with it. That's the whole point. Is that the ultimate education that we have is, wow, I do not have to go back into that war zone with that guy.
Oh yeah, it's like a totally abusive situation. Yeah, like it's obviously there's no. But it's like if you can also build up those skills to know when it is like an abusive situation or not an abusive situation as well. That's kind of, you can build up the skills for that as well. So I think a lot of people don't have it.
Yes, that's the skill that we want to find out is in some cases the right thing to do is to go along to get along. That in fact, for the society that you were raised in, that's what every kid does. 2-year-olds try to rebel. That's the 2-year-old. That's why they call it the terrible twos in the psychology office. And that we learn that rebellion gets our spanking for us. And so we don't rebel. So
yeah.
if we learn that rebelling is dangerous, then we can also begin to see that just quietly telling them the truth is often seen as a rebellion. They really don't want to hear it unless you've got the proof right there in your hand. so that you can show them. You can, instead of trying to prove that you're right, you can say, well, let's take a look at this piece of information, or let's look at this code, or let's look at this data. But if you don't have that, there's no reason to try to convince them. It's better to go get that data. And even better is to go get your own mind straightened out. Amrit, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to add one comment about one's own responsibility. In my own experience, what I observe is, if, for instance, a boss or a colleague or a friend insult me once, right, maybe like one minute, less than a minute, and my mind will keep bringing it up again and again, right? So it's clearly the mind is really making a big deal out of it, and many times maybe there was no real insult, maybe just a perception of insult was there.
Mm-hmm.
This is one thing. And also I have observed, about, like Robert was talking about, talking the truth. But at least for me, I see, like, sometimes I want to talk the truth, but later I realize it's not so much about talking the truth, but it's just like it's like winning
the point, making a point.
Yeah.
Exactly.
right. So
Yeah.
maybe I see the truth, but there's so many things happening. I will pick and choose which I think, okay, this is the truth, this definitely happened, and then I can win a point there. And I think the role of mind is also kind of playing a big role in amplifying the situation. And maybe when you say go for a hike, maybe this also meant, like, just forget about the situation for a while, and maybe chill out or go in a samadhi state, or
So, Anna from Mexico, you got your hand up? No. Okay. Lars, long time ago you had your hand up, and now I see it gone. Do you have you remember what it was that you were wanting to say? All right. So, I think that we've covered this. Robert, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. Just one important thing to add to all of what we've been saying, or emphasize about this, is a lot of the problem, I believe, is not having a clear boundary between yourself and the other. And now, of course, if we go into the no self territory, that gets a little tricky. But the reality
in fact,
is,
it does. That's the whole point is that you cannot expect anyone, especially in this sense you talk about the Stockholm Syndrome, we're talking about dealing with authorities. The whole point about being an authority is I am the authority. You can't expect him to be in the state of no self. This is, in fact, the way that I would say it then is that adapting to them is, yes, I will adapt, or rebelling from them is I rebel. But when we have the silence, who is silent? That's the direction of going to no self and actually leaving the situation. You're not there. There's no self there left. So adaptation and rebelling is self, and being quiet and leaving are in the direction of no self. Go ahead, Robert.
yes, well, this is a tricky part, because they're trying to induce in you a very negative version of no self, which would be called codependency, where you feel that you're completely dependent on this other person or
that's
situation.
The adaptation. That's the adaptation.
Yep, which
that's
is the negative side, the shadow side, of no self.
It's not a negative side of no self. It is self. And it's the negative side of self. Right, exactly. It is self.
It's like a defeated self, a victim self.
The victim,
as
exactly.
opposed to just leaving emotionally, psychologically, everything from the situation. I think that's really important to clarify, because so much of this is about this idea of we are in some, enmeshment of some kind with this person or this job or whatever it is, society, etc. But we don't have to be, especially because we don't really exist anyway. So we can just kind of, like, we don't have to go like this, but we could just kind of fade you know,
Yeah,
and
fade away. Exactly.
you know, fade away into the river, the happy river, you know, and yeah, I think that whole toxic self, victim self versus no self, of being so no self that you can leave, that's a really interesting little, you know, distinction there to be made.
Yes, that's an
You know,
important point. That it is the one who is not there is the one who leaves.
right. And if they're really there and they're
Then
really
we're going to stay
invested
and
in,
fight, or we're going to stay and adapt.
or they feel that responsibility thing, which is like a guilt mechanism, right?
Right.
And that's, there can even be love, you know, like in the classic Stockholm syndrome case, they actually love the person, right? Well, if
Well,
you
how much
get out of
adaptation are we
that,
going to do? That's the whole point of the adaptation.
yep,
Is
and if you get out of
become
that,
part of them. Exactly. So, Lars, you've got your hand up. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, the codependency thing. I associate that with you know, romantic relationships and so on. But I don't. It seems like, you know, some people have good relationships and a lot of people don't. And I never really made sense of codependency. It just like seems like a lot of people have challenges, and I don't. The difference between codependency and anything else, I'm not really sure. I never totally made sense to me. It seemed like a psychological term that people use, and I just never really.
Okay. Well, codependency can, in fact, be healthy, or it can be unhealthy. The old term for codependency was called symbiotic. And the symbiosis is almost always unhealthy. But the place where we saw symbiosis in the beginning in nature was like the big fish will let the little fish eat the scales off the big fish, and they both, the little fish gets the meal, and the big fish gets the bath. So
we'd
that
call
would
that
be
interdependency, not codependency is you're
all of
all
these
about
newfangled words. These are what do they
interdependency,
call it?
is
Does
there's
Generation
symbiosis, yeah.
Z, Gen Z language?
Yeah, Gen Z, millennial, that's, yeah, but that's what it is. It's interdependent instead
Yeah.
of co. Yeah, that's, yeah.
Well,
It's
the
a
word
cool
co is the
difference.
same word as interdependent. Go look it up in the dictionary. It's the same
No, it
thing.
seems like it. Yeah, it's just how it's used, you know. Yeah. The new kids, you know, on the
But
block.
we can see the distinction. We can see the difference in the sense that there are some interdependencies or codependencies or symbiotic relationships that are downright healthy. That in fact, that's what a real marriage should be. In whatever regard that you can think of it, with whatever roles that the people are playing, it's a healthy relationship when they're working together, cooperating with each other. Each one of them is pulling their own weight in different ways. An example of that would be plowing a field. That the horse or the water buffalo is pulling the plow, but the water buffalo can't plow just because all by himself. He needs the attendant behind him to guide. And so that's an interdependent. Now, the question would be, is what the water buffalo getting out of this? Well, he gets fed. For one thing, he doesn't have to do much of anything other than just pull a plow, which for water buffalo is a whole lot easier to do than for a human. So there is then the case of interdependencies or codependencies that are healthy because everyone is pleased and happy and they're getting the benefit out of it. But remember, you talking about the Stockholm syndrome, to where the person who is adapting is not getting any of his benefit out of it. It's like the wage earner. The employer wants to pay him less and less and less. Doesn't want to pay them what they're worth. They want to pay them as little as possible so that he can keep all the profits. So this would be also the case with the water buffalo. If you don't take care of the water buffalo water buffalo is going to be annoyed with the farmer because the farmer is not treating him well. So we have to see that we do have responsibilities in these codependencies, these symbiotic relationships, because often they're not healthy. And the place where you can tell that they're not healthy is when one of the persons in the codependency becomes the authority. And now we're back into the Stockholm syndrome. So now we can go so far to say that we have symbiotic relationships that are healthy, and then on the other side, we have the Stockholm syndrome, to where one of the people in the relationship wants to be the boss. So maybe we can put a point in with the Buddha talking about how to manage these kind of relationships. The answer is let the boss be bossy. In the case of the householder, he says just to sit on the porch and let the wife do all the work. She wants to do all the work. She wants to be the boss. Let her be the boss. And you can just sit there silently or mentally take a hike. You don't have to tell her. Maybe, in fact, she'll wind up starting asking your advice if you don't order her around, tell her what to do. But the hims and the hers, these pronouns can get entangled. That, in fact, it depends upon who is the Dhamma dude. And the Dhamma dude is the one who remains silent or takes a hike, or in a real codependency situation, he does his share. And part of his share is to not let the other person dominate them, give them that role. Let them be boss. Because the more you allow them to be boss, the less you have to do. But if you let them be the boss and then you let them order you around and you go do what you're told to do, that's being in the Stockholm syndrome again. But the right thing to do is to just let them be the boss and hang out and do nothing at all. Let them do it.
Hey,
You want the
I'd
grass
add-
cut? You go cut the grass.
I'd raise an important point there, which is letting them be the boss is actually a test of if they're able to be the boss.
Uh-huh.
And if they continue to do that to such an extent that it's not really possible for you to sit on the porch anymore, then you have to find a new porch to sit on.
That's the whole
You have
point.
to
Take a hike. How far
physically,
is your
and
porch?
not just mentally, physically too.
Exactly.
You know, you have to keep hiking until you're somewhere else. And
exactly so.
yeah, and it's kind of, yeah, the person that's sitting on that porch, on either gender, either whatever, they are, by letting the other person be the boss, they are really, that's kind of a test for them. Can they actually handle it? Or are they going to get so wound up in being the boss that the house burns down? You know, that's an important, yeah.
Or it comes back to the symbiotic relationship that's healthy, that when they need help, they'll ask for it. When they need advice, they'll ask for it, and they'll listen because they genuinely want it. But if you try to
That's
tell
the
them,
hope.
yeah, it's possible.
That's the hope, but
in
it doesn't
most
always
cases,
happen.
Doesn't always happen. That's the whole point, is you have to know when to leave. So, Thomas, you got the
I was
floor.
also thinking about another reaction to situations of conflict that wouldn't be good for the kind of situations we've been most talking about, of abusive relationships, because there it will be seen as rebellion, but it will be taking it with some sense of humor, which tends to reduce the competition side, and also is helpful to oneself to see that it's not really important. Of course, in a situation of abuse, that will be seen as rebellion, and that's probably a bad idea, because but in a more normal, lesser conflict with where there's not that kind of situation, I think it can be really helpful for both.
Yes, you made an important point just then, and that is it always depends upon what mood you are in. It always depends upon your own personal attitude. If your attitude is that of a victim, then the victim is going to try to make his point. The victim is going to adapt or rebel. If your attitude is the attitude of you're a winner, I don't need this, and you can just walk away. So it always has to do with how wholesome your own mentality is. And when you lose it, here's one of the points. And that is that if you can stay there silently and happily, that's the big win. If you cannot stay there silently without getting unhappy, now is the time to leave, to walk away, to go someplace so you can regain your joy. And after you've gotten your joy back again, now you can go back to the situation and deal with it joyfully. Always the situation is, can you deal with it joyfully? Can you joyfully adapt? It's almost impossible to joyfully rebel. And in fact, that's, what do they call a oxymoron? But you can joyfully adapt. Sure, I'll help you. Or we can remain silent and stay joyful. We can just sit there with a great big grin on our face. And every time they say something, we can just laugh away. But if we can't stay in a really good state, like in a real war zone, best thing to do is to walk, to go someplace else, to get away from it all, to go ordain, become a monk. Let's hear it for David. Yeehaw! Let's hear it for Mikey. Yeehaw! Okay, Lars, you got one final question. Let's do it.
Oh yes. So I talking about authoritarian government. Well, I was thinking about there's the idea that there's a checks and balances, separations of powers. You have the Congress, the judicial, and the executive, and then there's federalism where the central government should have limited powers, and the states have.
Yes, but you never had a government come to you. It's always a person. We're talking about interpersonal relationships. It's not possible to have a relationship with the U.S. government because the U.S. government only exists in your mind. Governments do not exist in reality. They exist as concepts in human minds. If we're talking about someone who is acting like an authority, you can have a government official that's happy-go-lucky. You can have a government official that's a bully. You can have a government official that's afraid of his boss. He's also caught into. So there's a lot of different possibilities, and it's always really good to talk to people as if they were human. For instance, if you're talking to a cop, don't talk to a cop. Talk to the poor dude that's in the blue suit. Always see humans as humans, never as the authorities that they're trying to make themselves up to be with the authority of some government. So go ahead, Lars.
Yeah, some people who are bullies, they don't actually have authority. They're a valued employee because they work hard. And they just decide to give you a hard time. They're not necessarily in charge.
They cannot give you.
Never put them.
Listen, second noble truth. They cannot give you a hard time. They are having a hard time and they want to give it away, but you're the one who gives yourself a hard time when they're trying to give it to you. Be very specific about that. The second noble truth, he cannot give you a hard time. Only you can give you a hard time.
Yeah, but they're the people that scream and yell sometimes or say, mean things or whatever. They don't have any authority. They just get away with it.
Yes, but you're the one who lets them get away with it. So it's time, Lars, for you to make a change. And one of the main changes right here to make is to stop seeing them as giving you a hard time and recognizing that you're the one who gives yourself the hard time.
There's another part to, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Robert.
There's another part to this which is really important, which is investigation and seeing reality. And the thing is when we get wrapped up in these types of situations, it's really easy to try and to get wrapped up in the other person's delusion or distortion, to adopt it. That's the survival strategy of the
right.
victim.
That's the survival strategy.
Yeah, and that's kind of instinctive almost, you know, and we're herd animals, human beings, so we tend to go along with things. And you know, and that's, I think, partly why that happens, of that enmeshment thing, where we get really wrapped up in what are they thinking, what are they feeling. That's what I am now, is what they're saying I am. But seeing reality is just seeing it as those are words.
Those are words.
And I don't like those words.
But as
and
I don't
have
like
options.
them, there's the me coming up. I don't like the words.
Well, that's the person that isn't practicing completely correctly, is the practicer, practicant, whatever you would call them. That's practicing correctly.
That's what the doctors call themselves.
There we go. Practitioner. Thanks. I'm tired, you know. Anyway, but the practitioner would say, I can choose to like it, to not like it, or to not care. Right? And then if they decide that the environment is not conducive to their practice, they will seek ways to leave. And like, I remember, Lars, you had mentioned a while ago that if you go to another job, it could be the same, but not necessarily, right? Like, every context matters. I've had places I've worked where everyone was miserable, and other places where everyone's really friendly. You know, like, there are different circumstances. Same with relationships. There are people that are very much dominant bullies, and there are other people that are very sweet and kind and sweethearts out there. You know, there's no golden rule here, except that you have a choice. You know, until a coconut falls on your head, you end up in the hospital. You have other problems if that happens. But as long as your brain is working, you have a choice. That's the only golden rule. All the rest is very contextual and subject to circumstance.
Right. So the ending of all of this is to look at what you're doing. Look at the thoughts that you're having. We learn how to do that in seclusion, but now it's the time to go out and actually apply it, in the sense of listening to how you feel when other people are talking, because you have control over how you feel. Even though they're trying to control how you feel, you are the one who has the choice. You can feel the way you want to feel. If he's giving you a hard time, that's in his mind. When he gives you a hard time, that means you bought it. You accepted that hard time. That's me. He gave me my hard time. But the reality is that you gave it to yourself. It was your choice. So we all, in these situations with the Stockholm syndrome, going back to the original point, we always have a choice. If you can remember that you have a choice. So if you do get kidnapped and they've got you tied up in the basement of some house, now's the time to remember you've got choices here about how you're going to feel. That's the whole teaching then, is remember that you've got choices about how you're going to feel. And if you can choose what you want to feel, why don't you choose to feel the way you want to feel? Why do we've been in the habit of it? But this is an interesting question. Why, when somebody tries to give us a hard time because they're having a hard time in their mind, why do we want to buy it? Why do we want to let them control our feelings The answer to that is we're in the habit of doing that. We have been in the Stockholm syndrome our whole lives. Wakey, wakey. Wake up, folks. See that you're being controlled by other people. And see also that in some cases, you're actually out there trying to control them. And the reason you're trying to control them is because of you're not looking at the way you feel. You think that if I can control them, I'll feel better. You can't control anybody. You only can control yourself. So this is the whole teaching of the Buddha. Wake up. Wakey, wakey. I used to get big smiles and laughs with that one. I'll try it again. Wakey, wakey. Wake up to see how you feel. Recognize it is your responsibility and that you have choices. In this case, you have the choice, are you going to feel good or are you going to feel bad? In this case, you have the choice, are you going to adapt? Are you going to rebel? Are you going to sit happily, quietly? Are you going to sit and fume? Or are you going to take a hike, an angry hike? Or are you going to take a happy hike?
Or
So
angry
we
and
have
it turns
8
happy.
different choices here. 8 choices.
Yeah.
Sometimes when I laugh at people, that gets me in trouble too, though.
Yes.
Well, that's okay.
That's okay. Let them have.
Maybe then
I mean,
they'll fire you, and then
if
you're really happy because you don't have to deal with them anymore.
Yes, that's always the case, that when you smile at people, when you laugh, they will take it sometimes personally, thinking that you're laughing at them. Well, in many cases, we are. That's exactly correct. My laughter is because I see you're an idiot. And you don't like it that I know that you're an idiot, and I'm telling you you're an idiot because I'm laughing at you. But they'll get over it if you keep.
Court? In court, they call that nonverbal aggression.
Mm-hmm.
You laugh at someone that's saying something ridiculous. That's a nonverbal aggression. I thought that was kind of funny.
Contempt of court. Contempt of court is a crime. Yeah,
actually, in a way, though, it is quite verbal. Laughter is verbal. A smile, not so.
Yeah, they call it that, though. That's what it's called. But you're right, because it is verbal. There's verbal.
Laughter is verbal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So silence is not laughter when you're laughing at someone. That's verbal. That's actually disagreeing with them. And in fact, when you're laughing at someone, isn't that rebellion? You're not stating that you're right and they're wrong, but you're actually saying so when you're laughing at someone. So naturally, they're going to have a little difficulty with that when you let them know that you're laughing at them. There's a difference between sitting and smiling happily versus laughing at someone. So let's put laughing at someone in that unhappy rebellion category.
Happy rebellion.
That I don't think that we can find the category of happy rebellion. And I don't think it is easy to find happy adaptation. We can do happy adaptation. There's happy rebellion that's so difficult to do.
I think the happy adaptation is to let them be the boss and then they turn happy eventually. That would be the happy adaptation. Mm-hmm. But there's also unhappy, which is the Stockholm syndrome. Taking that too far, that approach.
Exactly. But we always have the possibility of deciding how we feel only when we remember to look at how we feel. That's the choice. Going back to the Eightfold Noble Path of the Buddha, you have to look at how you're feeling in order to have some control over how you feel.
Yes, and so much of this is about not caring what other people think.
You don't even know what other people are thinking.
We don't. We just don't. It could be someone's miserable and they're giving you a hard time, but they really kind of like you, but they're just having a hard day. Mm-hmm. You know, it's just them.
taking
just
it
don't
out
know.
on you. Yes, they
Yeah,
see you
it
as an
just
easy punching bag. You don't punch back.
right
They take
for
their
sure.
rebellion to the boss, to you. In fact, in TA, they call this the pecking order, where the big boss gives the middle management boss a hard time. The middle management, he goes and he talks to the lower level management and gives them a hard time. No fuss back. The
Then he
lower
catches.
level management goes to the employee and gives him a hard time. The employee goes to the janitor and gives him a hard time. The janitor comes home and has a fight with his wife and takes it out on her. She then fusses at the kid, and the kid kicks the dog. This is the pecking order. You can't rebel up. You got to rebel down, because rebelling up is dangerous.
Then the dog chases a squirrel.
Yeah, it depends upon which dog you get.
Well, what's so funny about this too is sometimes we can misinterpret things. So like there have been times where I thought someone was being rude to me, but what I learned is that's just how they are, and they were just acting habitually, and they didn't have any rude intention at all. I think we've all
Right.
had experiences like that, or we've been that person
Actually, it
where
depends
they
upon the
thought we were
culture
being rude.
too. Any
Yep.
time that an Englishman talks to a German, the German's angry. But when the German's talking to a German, he's not angry. But when the German is talking to a Russian, the Russian's angry. But when the Russian is talking to a Russian, another Russian, he's not angry.
That was
It
like the
depends
Dalai.
upon the.
That was
What
like
was
the
that?
Dalai Lama. The Dalai Lama said, "It's like being angry at fire for burning, because that's just what fire does." Might be
I
angry
didn't
at fire.
catch that.
The Dalai Lama said, "It's like being angry at fire for burning. Why be angry at fire? Because fire just burns. If you right."
Well, that's true. You're the one who's on fire. I'm hot. I don't like it. But when we recognize we've got choices, then we can do something about it. David, do you have any last things to say?
Yeah, we got choices. I like the choices: joyfully adapt, joyfully remain silent, or joyfully walk away. I think
All
those are,
right.
yeah.
Yeah, those are the three best. Yes,
pick-
Juan.
Pick the safest option. Yeah.
Mike 80, you have something to say about this? I'll give you a chance later.
Thank you everyone for being here today. Hopefully you didn't feel Stockholm syndrome having to stay on the call. But you know, you have a choice about that, and I'm glad everyone chose to be in Sangha.
Excellent. How about you, Ross? You have any last comments?
Just thank you to everyone as always. It's always good staying down with everyone. But just making me reflect on myself and really appreciating that my practice is becoming stronger. I'm becoming more skillful. I'm able to control how I feel more. I'm able to recognize these thoughts more. So it's all down to the Sangha.
Congratulations. Good for you. Excellent.
Bravo.
Bravo. Anna from Mexico, you got any last remarks?
I found this talk very interesting. Thank you to everyone.
How about you, Anna Sis in France? You got anything to say? Good to see you, my friend.
I'm very happy, and yes, we always have the choice, and whatever happened outside, sometimes we cannot do anything about it, but the only thing we can do is to change our mind. So let's just do it.
Yes, that's exactly correct. Amrit, you have any last things to say?
Thank you very much for the talk, Dhammarato, and everybody else. And for me, I completely agree with Anna. Yes, I will make the choice of gladdening my mind and staying away from Mara. So I will not be silent. I will just walk away as soon as the Mara comes. Thank you.
Good one. Yes, congratulations. You're doing very well, my friend. How about you, Ben? Do you have any last things to say? How about you, Jonesy? You got anything to say?
Just that I enjoy spending time with y'all. Thanks for a interesting talk as always.
All right. How about you, Carl? You got any last comments?
Yeah, thank you, everyone. It was a great talk. Wasn't Buddha a happy rebel?
Say what? What was that last thing?
Wasn't Buddha a happy rebel?
All right. Let's see who else. Lars, you have any last comment?
No, thank you.
All right. I see Edward. Edward, do you have any comment? Well, that about covers it all. Mikey, take this thing home.
Okay, y'all. If you haven't yet, I'd like to ask for each and every one of you to go ahead and subscribe to our YouTube channel and to the people watching this video as well. Subscribing to our YouTube helps keep the videos in people's feed. It tells the YouTube algorithm that y'all are liking and enjoying watching the videos. And
Yeah,
also,
do some liking, do some comments.
yeah, do some comments, things like that. Yes, yes. And also, yeah, check out opensangafoundation.org. Make an account if you haven't. Please use your real name and a real profile picture of yourself. It's a website meant to bring together Dhamma friends and to assist people in finding Watts and information about
Finding a teacher.
Yeah, and finding teachers and friends, this sort of thing. And yeah, to our Sangha in particular, if there's anything you find difficult to navigate about the website, or if any bugs come up in your experience,
blame him for it.
Yeah, let me know. And I'll maybe do it, maybe won't. I don't know. Maybe we'll fix it, maybe we won't.
But we'll not fix it happily.
Yeah. Either way, I'll be happy. Anyways, thank you so much, Dhammarato, and everyone for this talk. And I really enjoyed it today. Everybody take care.
All right, folks. This has been a good one.
Well,
We'll all
thank you
meet
all.
in Stockholm someday.
You know, we're all free. We just got to keep reminding ourselves that.
All right. Thank you so much, everybody.
Take care, everyone. Thank you very much.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Nice to see you. Bye bye.
Bye-bye.